state your name, please, and begin your presentation, sir.
Do I click? My name is Logan M. Isaac. I'm here to provide context for two legislative concepts I authored that were submitted on September 27th by Vice Chair Senator Thatcher and Representative James Heeb. LC 2560 urges Congress to conduct public hearings on anti-military bias and improve enforcement of hate crimes protections for military families. LC 2984 will be our nation's first comprehensive military civil rights act. All citizens are supposed to be equal in a democracy, but states have more rights than their residents, and some citizens have more rights than others. As a soldier, I bet my life on liberty and justice for all, but as a veteran, I'm deprived of the civil rights my service is supposed to secure because GI Justice is MIA. I spent 6 years in light infantry and airborne units serving our nation as an artillery forward observer. After deploying to an unjust and unpopular war, I came home to civilians profiting off of my service. When I called for accountability, they shored up their ill-gotten privilege by labeling me untrustworthy, mentally ill, and disrespectful. Through it all, I exhausted every opportunity to bring the lack of our civil rights to public attention. If this is the first time you've heard of me, it's not because I've been making myself invisible. Civilian bias has been throttling my voice. My mournful melody muffled by forces that prefer I open my wrists than my mouth. We cannot be serious about military suicide prevention until we are serious about human dignity for military families. Just because soldiers can take more shit than civilians doesn't mean that we should. Military training and culture is such that when veterans discover their own finitude, self-harm is more intuitive than self-advocacy. I refuse to live a life determined by a civilian gaze insisting that I make myself small, colorless, dull, and numb. For caged birds, survival is a form of resistance. I'm here to sing of freedom, but it's up to each of you to determine whether you hear my song as a fearful trill or a rallying cry. What will be clear by the end of my presentation is that GI Justice is MIA. I'll begin with the need for military civil rights in Oregon, then I'll speak about the memorial in the context of political and media silence. So what does anti-military bias look like? For brevity, I'll focus my testimony on employment, education, and hate crimes. The Oregon revised statutes contain 3 laws intended to protect military families, none of which represent meaningful legislation, and all of them fit within employment. It's a lesson I learned after my application to the adjunct pool at a public employer was ignored. The executive director for human resources at the Lynn Benton Community College refused to confirm ORS 408230 was followed unless I filed a $25 public records request. I know accountability comes at a cost. I just didn't realize that at a price tag. As for private employment, ORS 408497 is no law at all, since subsection 2 makes it optional, and I quote, a private non-public employer may give preference, end quote. ORS 659A.082 appears to have some enforceability, but I could find no Oregon case law other than the case of a National Guard Major General, Bush v. City of Prineville, which dealt mostly with attorney's fees. As far as I can tell, grunts like myself have no meaningful employment protections in Oregon state law because GI Justice is MIA. As a resident of Benton County and an aspiring academic, Oregon State University represents the closest opportunity for me to complete a terminal degree and enter the professional workforce. But data suggests OSU is a hostile environment for veterans. According to the most recent Equal Opportunity and Access report, veterans are disproportionately represented in the lowest tiers of university employment. At the top, you can see the census percentage of veterans as residents. Workforce is something like 5.7%. Their academic tenures is 1%. So as we go down, the numbers get closer to representation, but as a whole, veterans are only 43% utilized at OSU. The diminishing representation is a trend at OSU. Although responsible for the funding and construction of Memorial Hall after World War I, Memorial Union after World War I, veterans voluntarily moved to Snell Hall in 2019. But if you're looking for battle buddies at the address listed online, you're met with 7 arrows pointing you in the other direction, like a warning label, proceed with caution. I know it's important for vet centers to be able to offer anonymity and respite from civilian bias. But invisibility should be an option, not an expectation. Despite serving the 3rd largest student population, the OSU Veteran Center doesn't get the same treatment as other centers. Maybe because OSU thinks military has no culture? Sequestering military students penalizes humility while making invisibility non-negotiable. An echo of the refrain beaten into us at boot camp, shut up and drive on. You think veterans don't know? Just check the EOA data on discrimination and harassment complaints. They're the only population that successfully shuts up. Soldiers learn to keep our heads down because when you speak up, you get shot down. As we'll see with hate crimes, civilian bias is just there to make sure we don't forget our training. And if we don't silence ourselves, civilian journalists and politicians will gladly do it for us because GI justice is MIA. On July 4th, 2010, my local American Legion Hall in Albany was burned to the ground in a 3-alarm fire. It took 5 months and the assistance of federal law enforcement agencies to finally arrest Trent Allen Fox. After passing a mental exam, he took a plea deal that allowed him to avoid trial, leaving members of the American Legion Post 10 without an answer as to the why of the matter. 8 months before the blaze, Congress passed the Hate Crimes Prevention Act of 2009. Section 4712 of the HCPA, known as the Soldiers Amendment, created protections from hate and bias for soldiers and their dependents up to 5 years after discharge, the only civil rights law with an expiration date, by the way. In his speech introducing the landmark bill, President Barack Obama made no mention of the Soldiers Amendment, a chilling precedent that subsequent administrations have shamelessly maintained, from the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights and the EEOC to the Departments of Labor, Education, and Justice. Oops. The prohibition on attacks of United States servicemen on account of service, or 18 U.S. Code Section 1389, has never been enforced by the FBI. Not when Trent Fox burned down a Legion post, not when Antonio Martinez targeted enlisted soldiers of a recruiting station in Baltimore, not when Mufid Elfki targeted regulars of his New York City pizza parlor coming home from deployment, and not when Munir Abdelkader targeted an entire military family in Cincinnati, including their child, for a televised beheading. Their targets are GI Does because soldiers' identities are the only part of them that receive meaningful protections. America prefers its sacrificial lambs nameless and faceless. Every soldier, a nobody for every body except their own body. Military suicide is just collateral damage of civilian privilege because GI justice is MIA. To conclude, let me draw our attention to the moral failure of the so-called Fourth Estate in order to provide context for the memorial. Having a free press used to mean protecting journalists from political influence, but now it names the price American consumers expect to pay for things to which they feel entitled, like freedom. In an attention economy like ours, salaries are paid with the ads, not the verbs, not the words. When sensationalism is what sells, service must be sensationalized to be noticed. Civilian bias forces soldiers into one of 3 caricatures. The victor instills pride, as though our war heroes can do no wrong on our behalf. The villain evokes panic, as though flexing your index finger is a specialized skill. The victim deserves pity, as if soldiers have everything to receive and nothing to give. But responsibility is the price of power. The decline of journalism is not the fault of consumers. Journalists turn a blind eye to civilian bias because they're civilians blinded by their own bias, from powerhouses like the New York Times to our own The Oregonian. After a veteran was charged with intimidation in 2017, both outlets called it a hate crime, as though veterans are only newsworthy as perpetrators, but not survivors, because GI justice is MIA. Civilian stereotypes persist because there's a grain of truth in them. But when a few grains get a disproportionate amount of resources, civilian stereotypes become silos for Americans to sort everyone from friends and family to complete strangers. Military families are a minority governed by elected officials who do not represent them. Civil rights are the political expression of human dignity. My life has no value if laws protecting it go unenforced. FBI Director Christopher Wray has already ignored 2 congressional inquiries asking why the Soldiers Amendment has never been enforced. The first from the House in 2019, and the second just 2 months ago from our own senior senator. The memorial will be the 3rd legislative attempt to hold executive agencies accountable. But it will only succeed if the press and legislators alike demand better stories be told about soldiers and veterans. Military families need civilian allies because GI justice is MIA. I'm tired of being labeled untrustworthy, mentally ill, and disrespectful for asking why my family and I are denied the rights my own service supposedly secures. I've petitioned Congress, the press, veteran service organizations, the list could go on, and now there's 2 legislative concepts set for consideration by the most powerful entity in our union, a state legislative assembly. These concepts need sponsors before session begins in January. So I'm asking, who will step up to the mic to sing with me of freedom? At best, I'll feel the little remedy, but at worst, the world will sing along. GI justice may be MIA, but don't let it be dead on arrival. I ask for the time and opportunity to respond to any questions or comments the committee may have.
Questions from the committee? Seeing none. Mr. Logan, Isaac, thank you very much. And that concludes our our informational meeting for today. And colleagues, we are adjourned.